Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. Again, a big welcome to everyone who's joined us today, especially our hosts for all of the breakout rooms. We've had lots of generous people who've stepped up and have agreed to both host and co-host the breakout rooms. My name is Lisa Hunter, and I'm at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. And I'm also on the executive board for the American Auditory Society, and I have the honor of chairing the student and postdoc mentoring committee right now. And I took over from Kelly Tremblay just last year. I think Kelly is going to be joining us today too, which will be great. And she started a wonderful tradition of having mentoring meetings at the American Auditory Society in person about 3 years ago. So we've kept that going. And we have seen that we need to have mentoring events throughout the year, not just at the meeting. The meeting is a wonderful place to have those, but we wanted to start these virtual meetings. And so we're really happy to have this one today that's been organized by our committee. So I thought that this may seem a little bit cheesy, but I think we can all use spas about now because everyone's super stressed out and dealing with lots of uncertainty and lots of, not only personal, but professional changes. And it's all just, very hard to know what's going to happen next and how best to navigate it. And unfortunately, spas are closed mostly, so that's not very helpful. But in thinking about kind of the theme of spas, so spas is a new group that we just started. It's students and postdocs of AAS. So you can really think of this as kind of the kickoff session for spas. So we invited everyone who's a student postdoc, but it's actually open to all of the membership. And we have some senior people here with us today too. So we're all in it together. But even before COVID, we were talking a lot about what we could do at AAS to increase the opportunities for mentoring beyond just the annual meeting. We know that all of us are under lots of pressure, and that's especially acute for more junior investigators to produce and communicate high quality science. And of course, the monkey on everyone's back is getting funding for the science that we do. And the competition's ever increasing each year. It becomes more and more difficult. With the special challenges that we're all facing with COVID, we need to have faith and we need to support each other that yes, the world is going to bounce back, but the landscape's going to look different. And it's a little unsure how that's going to be, but we really want hearing science to continue to survive and thrive. And everything that we can do to help our next generation of researchers is going to put us on a better foundation for making sure that all of our labs continue and that we're all able to work together. So one thing related to this, the reason I chose this little picture is that to me, mentoring is like lighting a spark. It's, talking to people about their ideas and what they, think they could bring to this. As a mentor, you're trying to put little rocks in place, to help them build up a foundation in different areas. And then hopefully that's going to help them eventually blossom and become, independent researchers on their own. And there are a million different ways to be a mentor. There are millions of mentors around the world and many ways of doing it. There's not one right way, but these kind of three things, at least to me and the mentors that I've had that are really terrific, is that they kind of give me the freedom to think about my own ideas. They've helped me with, the pieces and the parts of science and knowing the landscape and how to navigate that. And then that's helped me to, to grow and, be able to take on students of my own. And I think that's what we're all trying to achieve. So we did a brief survey. I think a lot of people on the call probably filled it out because we had 93 responses. And you can see in the little graph that was a really nice, diverse cross-section of people, mostly AUD students, secondly, PhD students, and then we had this nice group of combined AUD PhD students and postdocs. And then it went the gamut from early career investigators, early AUD career people, and then, or clinicians, and then none of the above. So we're not quite sure what they are, but it was great to have this survey filled out from so many different people. So we had kind of an open-ended question asking people what their goals were for attending the AAS meeting every year. And this came through over and over and over again. I would say at least half of the comments were some permutation of networking, collaboration, and science. And I love this one with the exclamation point after science. A lot of people talked about AAS providing CEUs that are at a higher level than other meetings that they've been to. And they talked a lot about the social aspects, seeing friends, meeting new people in person, face to face.
Hey, Lisa, we're seeing your slides not in presenter. We're seeing them as your presenter view and not in the
that's interesting. How about now if I click over onto my other screen? Because they're in presenter mode on my side. Let me just go to display settings. I only have one more after this, but let me
I can
swap.
see your slides.
Are they in presenter mode? Okay.
Now they're good.
I had to swap the screens. Thank you, Sumit. So that social aspect was really important. And then presenting your own work, getting good feedback from people while you were there, and then attending the NIH and NIDCD session to listen for grant updates. So most of the comments were in these 4 categories, which was, I think, pretty consistent. And then we asked what top needs or priorities of information and advice to support your career were. And you can see some of the categories on the right. I won't read all of them, but the top 4 priorities were mentoring from established researchers, strategies to obtain funding for research, guidance to develop a 5-year career plan, and how to be a clinician scientist. And so in thinking about this session and why we, designed this meeting today, we wanted to start to kick off a program on mentoring from established researchers. So all of the people that we have co-hosting today are either established researchers or they're on their way to doing that. And all of the people co-hosting today are either on the committee, so thank you to all of our committee members, or they're on the board of AAS. And so some of the topics or actually all the topics that we're doing today were pulled from this survey as well. So we had an open-ended question about specific topics that people were interested in. So our committee looked at that. And so when we designed the meeting today, we pulled directly from this survey to come up with the topic areas that we're covering. So with that, I want to thank the committee. I don't want to go through and introduce everybody, although I'd love to do that. It'll take up too much time. So what we're going to do is everyone will introduce themselves when they're hosting their breakout sessions and tell you a bit more about themselves. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our first presenter, who is Sumit Dar. Sumit is a professor at Northwestern University and a dean now at Northwestern as well for research. And as you know, all of you who know Sumit, he's an incredibly nice guy to start with. He's an incredibly supportive guy. He has been so supportive of this committee. He is the immediate past president for AAS, put on a fantastic meeting last year, the last meeting before COVID, and is helping along with Dr. Charles Lim, who's our current president, to put on the next meeting of AAS, which will be virtual. So we all have a big challenge before us to make the meeting just as good, and in some ways maybe better than it is in person, but different. And so that's what we're all, really working hard on right now. So we really thank Sumit for everything that he's given to AAS and for being here today, and for his willingness to talk as current president of AAS today. I think I misspoke, current president. So thank you, Sumit, and let's, without further ado, let's hear from you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. I don't have slides, so we can turn off screen share if you'd like till the moment arrives. So thank you to Dr. Hunter and the rest of the mentorship committee. This is like all of the other committees, they're very active and dedicated. And this year it's a major change in operational aspects with very many new programs, and I'm very, very grateful. And I'm so pleased that I'm able to participate and maybe contribute a little bit. So the sort of title of my remarks today is, why are there no drive-through mentorship services? And like I said, I don't have any slides. This is sort of my informal remarks about my thoughts on mentorship. As I see all the faces on the screen, I'm even more nervous than I was before. But I can promise you that the low quality of my remarks will be made up later on by a surprise visitor, surprise guest who will provide very high quality remarks about mentorship. So here we go. Why are there no mentorship drive-thrus? Of all places in the US of A, home of the drive-through baptism, the drive-through funeral, and everything in between. Why is there no drive-through mentorship? You may not have pondered this important existential question before, but I have, and I've looked for an answer in all places. There may not be drive-through mentorship, but there certainly is no dearth of answers when it comes to mentorship. There are experts on mentorship and mentorship programs everywhere, on the shelves of real and virtual bookstores, on the program pages of pretty much every social organization, academic organization, entrepreneurial organization, commercial or philanthropic organization. And of course, on every social media platform. There may not be drive-through mentorship, but there certainly is YouTube mentorship, and a lot of it. When Dr. Hunter asked me to speak at this meeting, first I tried to get out of it by suggesting every other format possible. She was not buying any of it. Then came the panic, and I started devouring everything I could find on mentorship, books, blogs, and yes, YouTube videos. There are so many experts, so many viewpoints, so many definitions, and so many opinions. I thought I knew about mentorship. I thought I had benefited from having great mentors. I thought I had tried to be a decent mentor. But listening to all of these voices, all of these opinions, one cannot help but be confused. So I went back to the drawing board and tried to think deeply about my own experiences with mentors and mentorship. At the end of it all, I have come to believe that these many voices, these varied opinions, and these diverse points of view about mentorship exist for a reason. They exist because mentorship exists in at least that many forms and then some. This then creates the next dilemma. What do I tell you about mentorship? Before I begin, though, let me tell you about the discovery that rescued me from the deep throes of depression from being confused about mentorship. It turns out that differences in opinion about the nature and essence of mentorship is not a modern phenomenon. Certainly not the result of the proliferation of social media platforms and the countless gurus that they have spawned. Turns out there indeed was a great debate about mentorship in 1921. It played out in the pages of journals and books, and the protagonists were none other than Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein. Both believed mentorship was essential to one's success, but they held very different views on how mentorship was beneficial. Edison argued that mentors impart to students a subject matter's essential facts and formulas in aid of preparing students to be on the leading edge of application. I can only surmise that Edison did not mean facts as in information that could be read or learned from books or at the library. He was probably thinking about the unwritten rules or properties of a system or science, the secret sauce that was at the bleeding edge of knowledge. Nonetheless, Edison saw value in mentorship as an essential conduit of knowledge. This point of view, of course, is very reminiscent of many oral cultures of knowledge transmission in the history of humankind. Indeed, the idea and importance of a guru is still alive and thriving in many forms of classical music, yoga, spiritualism, and the likes. Albert Einstein countered that mentors should promote new thinking in students. The value of an education, he concluded, is not the learning of many facts, but the training of the mind to think something that cannot be learned from textbooks. Again, I surmise that Einstein's thinking was far from transmission of knowledge and skills at the other end of the philosophical horizon from Edison's position. Perhaps he was imagining a mentor as being a gentle guide, providing universal principles that govern thinking and perhaps even acting. Well, which camp are you in? I know which camp I am in today. I'm going to tell you about it in just a second. But I should also tell you that I was not in the same camp a few years ago. And there's no guarantee that I will be in the same camp if you ask me again tomorrow. All this to simply say that my thinking about mentors and mentorship has evolved with time. I will give you a glimpse of where my thinking is today, but I will take you on a brief walk of the path I've traveled to come to my current thinking about mentorship. Let's go. My earliest memories of thinking about who a mentor might be probably goes back to high school. I have a very clear memory of being completely in awe of my biology teacher. He knew the answer to every question we asked. He knew a lot about a lot of other things going on in the world, and he told us about them. He dressed well, he spoke well, and he had this air about him that just exuded confidence. I was convinced I had found my mentor. I learned a lot that year. And the next year arrived, and I had a different biology teacher. I did not like or worship him as much, but I learned even more about even more complicated aspects of biology from him. It was not until much later in my life and after many other great teachers that I realized that a great teacher is one of the most precious gifts one can get. But a great teacher does not necessarily have to be a mentor. In my teen years, I also thought I had one or two social mentors. These were guys I either played soccer or music with. They were a year or two older than me and were more skilled at their craft than I was at that time. They had the freedom and courage to say and do things that I did not, a sure sign of someone who should be a teenager's role model. I so desperately wanted to be like them. A couple of years passed, and by some miracle, my dreams came true. I was a better soccer player and a better musician than I was before. I had the freedom and courage to do a few more things. And as a bonus, there were even a couple of younger kids who started hanging around me like I used to hang around my erstwhile mentors. Again, it was much later in life that I realized that just being ahead on the trajectory of time is not qualification enough to be a mentor. Each one of us is on a path of constant evolution as the earth spins and travels around the sun incessantly. We do not need mentorship to achieve goals where just time is enough. Even later in life, I found myself in trouble often, academic trouble, scientific trouble, social trouble, you name it, and I've had my fair share of these troubles. In many of these instances, I have been so fortunate to have the friendship and counsel of trusted advisors who have helped me carve a way out of the troubled spot. These situations can be intense, and the help received feels so very profound and impactful that it is easy to conceive of these relationships as those of mentorship. And perhaps they are. Perhaps mentorship can be contextual and time limited, extinguished after the goals of that particular situation have been reached or when life circumstances have changed, either for the better or towards a crisis even bigger and more immediate. Whatever the case, these relationships are akin to bursts of mentorship, crucial for defined phases of one's life and important to ensure that life's trajectory does not get too distorted beyond reason. While I have valued these mentors and their mentorship very much, my view of mentorship has shifted from here as well. Today, I seek out mentors and mentorship that is long-term, context-free, and steeped deeply in honesty, trust, and acceptance. I am largely who I will be at this point in my life. My academic, scientific, personal, and social trajectories are more or less determined. Yet the value I find in mentorship has never been greater. I have a small circle of mentors I can call with any question. I can seek their opinion about major decisions and dilemmas. I can tell them about my motivations with complete honesty. I can ask for their help without fear of any kind of judgment. And I know that I will have their acceptance and trust no matter what the situation. These mentors are not necessarily in my academic discipline, let alone in my narrow area of scientific interest. They need not necessarily be academics or scientists even. What I find in them is that they have What I find them to have common and have in spades is the ability to be introspective, ability to think long term, and an uncanny ability to set aside their biases and interests to give me objective advice that is good for me. One last thing of note, each of them gives me advice with all their passion and intellect behind it, but holds no grudges if I choose to go another direction. This is the style of mentorship that works for me today. It's not the style that worked for me in years past, and there's no guarantee that my needs for mentorship will not evolve farther in the time to come. If your experience is anything like mine, there will likely be a few basic characteristics of a mentor that will serve you best. And the sooner you recognize those characteristics, the easier it will be for you to find meaningful mentorship. I will gladly accept and be grateful for any and all forms of mentorship. But what works best for me is a long-term relationship that evolves with my career and my life in general. I get most from mentors with whom I share a common set of values, be it general values about life and relationship, or be it more specific values that determine things such as meaningful collaboration or even order of authors on a paper. I feel most comfortable with a mentor with whom I can share a vision of science should be done, of how science should be done. Topical or methodological overlap is a secondary consideration by quite a distance. Above all, I seek and soak up mentorship from individuals who are generous and selfless in their counsel and advice. Perhaps these traits of scientific generosity and professional selflessness are most attractive to me because this is the kind of mentor I would like to be. I have no idea how well I'm able to model these traits of a mentor. I can tell you with a lot of confidence, though, that over time I have developed a keen eye for recognizing a good mentor when I see one. This is intuitive because it is extremely difficult to make decisions about the value of mentorship or determine good mentorship based on data. Yes, Socrates mentored Plato, who mentored Aristotle, who mentored Alexander the Great. But no one ran the control experiment to determine if Aristotle would have been any less successful if he hadn't found his way into Plato's academy outside of Athens. I'm a full believer in the anecdotal and intuitive evidence about the merits and benefits of good mentorship. What is astounding to me is that some amongst us are absolute naturals at being outstanding mentors. You only have to witness them in action for a few seconds to become a complete believer in the powers of mentorship. Let me tell you a quick story to illustrate my point. A few years ago, a very well-established hearing scientist was giving a talk at Northwestern. As is custom, he came by our labs and talked to students and faculty during his visit. In my lab, he was having a conversation with James Dewey, then in the PhD program and now a rising star at the University of Southern California. James told the visitor about the experiments he was doing at that time to figure out a way to effectively use spontaneous autoacoustic emissions to query the efferent control of the human cochlea. James even shared some preliminary results with our visitor. The visitor was not impressed at all, telling James he was focusing on too small a problem and getting off on the wrong foot. Visitor went on to suggest that if James did not change course, he would spend his life studying 2 dB problems and not make any worthwhile contributions. Needless to say, James was heartbroken, questioning the direction of his work and even whether he should be getting a PhD at all. I was trying my best to cheer James up, but was genuinely afraid that James would lose heart. In a few days, another visitor came by the lab, another prominent hearing scientist on campus to give a talk, visiting the lab just like the previous visitor. James still tells the same story, albeit in a little less enthusiastic tone. Well, the reaction he got could not have been any more different. The visitor applauded James for having the guts to tackle an important problem, recognized the methodological challenges associated with making these measurements, and assured James that his work will lead him to ask questions of ever increasing importance as he made his way through his career. I sat there with my jaw literally on the floor. I could see the instant change in James' posture and demeanor. With renewed enthusiasm, James wrote and received an F-31 grant from the NIH, finished his PhD doing really, really important work, went on to a postdoc with John Ogilvy, and is continuing to flourish as a scientist. I had just witnessed an act of instant and profound mentorship. There indeed is such a thing as drive-through mentorship. Just be careful in choosing the drive-through window. This second visitor was none other than Ed Rubel, one of the foremost hearing scientists of our times. I had not mentioned a word about James' previous encounter to Ed. To this day, I have no idea if he somehow sensed that James needed the encouragement. Over time, though, I've come to realize that Ed is one of those gifted, generous, and insightful mentors, not only to individuals, but also to groups, departments, and indeed institutions. Well, aren't we lucky? Ed Rubel is amongst us today, and he has agreed to answer a few questions about mentorship. For those of you who do not know Ed Rubel, very briefly, he's professor emeritus at the University of Washington, where he led the Bloedel Hearing Research Center for many years. He has won every award you've ever heard of, including the American Auditory Society's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. So without wasting any more time, let me jump right in and ask Ed a few questions so you can hear some real words of wisdom about mentorship. First, thank you, Ed, for agreeing to do this. This is the highlight of this whole session for us. You have spent a half a century in hearing science, making seminal discoveries and very impactful contributions. You started in the general area of mechanosensory neuroscience, then worked on auditory development and function in the avian brainstem, then focused on cochlear sensory cells. In the last area, you're one of the pioneers in studying hair cell regeneration. In the last few years, you've gifted the field an entirely new method of rapid throughput evaluation of mechanisms of hair cell death, preservation, and regeneration. Of course, this brief listing of your work does terrible injustice to the breadth of your contributions. However, what I'm curious about is who you consider to have been influential mentors for you. How did these mentorship relationships develop? And how did these mentors shape the work you've done and continue to do today?
Well, thank you, Sumit. I feel like I should just do a rerun of your comments. They were brilliant and really insightful. And I'm delighted to have a chance to answer some of the questions because mentoring has been clearly one of the highlights of my career. The first thing I want to say is that one size doesn't fit all, okay? I might have walked in that day to your student and said, what the hell is he doing? But he explained it beautifully to me. And I'm sure I was in a good mood. I was in a good place. I was there, okay? So one mentor might not be a good mentor for other people at other times, okay? And by the same token, a person has to choose mentors for different parts of their life and different parts of their careers. I'll talk about career mentoring, but let me start by saying, I had mentors throughout my life, like you talked about. And, my father was my mentor about integrity, okay, and living a life and trying to do it with integrity at every step of the way and every time you had to look in the mirror. My mother, okay, I'm the son of a Jewish origin family, and I'm the first son, and so I was perfect in every way, obviously, to her, and she was my mentor about love, okay, but I also other mentors like you. I had an English teacher who, really taught me the importance of writing and taught me how to write early on, and would spend enormous amounts of time teaching me that and going over what I did wrong and letting me practice and so forth. So that trust and that, and I guess the thing I want to say most about mentoring, and if I say nothing else, the most important thing is that it's got to be about the mentee. It's got to be about that person in your office or sitting on a bench in the park. Okay. If you can't, it can't be about your next grant. It can't be about their contribution to your research. It's about them. And if you can't do that, and some people can't do that, don't try.
Yeah.
Okay. I know brilliant scientists, okay, that just could not do that. They're focused on their work and they think anybody that's in their lab should be focused on their work. Don't try. Okay. But if you want to have a legacy, that's the only way. As I went through graduate school, I had three mentors. I had Jack Johnson, who was my professor, who taught me electrophysiology and had lunch with me almost every day. And actually, my wife still talks about it, has had dinner with us almost every night. And Jack, kind of, we were a family. Okay, and that's the way he thought of the people in his lab, his family. He was not married, and so we were a surrogate family. Glenn Hatton, who was a brilliant scientist, I didn't work in his area at all. In fact, he came over to the lab to learn stuff from us. Okay, but he was a brilliant scientist, and he taught me really how to think about my sciences, how to attack a question. Okay, because he was very critical, but would share that critical aspect with me in a non-pompous way, and at any length of time that I needed. And then there was Gilbert Gottlieb, a famous developmentalist, okay, who I never published a paper with, but we met when I was a senior graduate student, and he invited me to North Carolina for part of the summer, and we developed a friendship over Southern whiskey, okay, often bootleg Southern whiskey, and sitting up at night. And he really taught me about how to study development. And he's the person that turned me on to development. So these people played different roles in my education. Alvin Quirham was a mentor about how to work with the university. As I started doing more things and I became heads of committees and stuff like that, Alvin was the vice provost of research. And I used to go home and tell my wife, you know what Alvin said? This is really cool. He actually understood the role of the academy in society and taught me about that. So I agree with your feeling of it's got to be about the person. It's got to be somebody you trust. It's got to be somebody, for me, that reeks of credibility, but recognizes and admits fallibility.
Yeah.
Okay, B.F. Skinner was a horrible mentor, they say, because he believed strongly in everything he thought.
Yeah.
Okay. And had no flexibility. You have to be fallible. It's got to be about the students. The other thing to remember, I think, is that there are a lot of people that need mentorship, and it's a matter of, what carrots and what sticks do you do? But there's some students that come to your lab, you're very fortunate, okay, that don't need mentorship. You just let them go. Okay, and once in a while they'll walk into your office. A woman named Julie Harris. Okay, I'd walk into her office. I said, Julie, maybe we should try this experiment. And she'd look at me and she said, do you want to see the data? And so those sort of things really happen, and it's a very, very willing thing. And sometimes you make guesses. Okay, and you might ponder over them. What are the right carrots and sticks for this particular student? Okay, a woman named Sarah Woolley, who said I could use her name, talked to her yesterday, was a student. Sarah's a well-known birdsong person. She just retired, no, stepped down as chairman of psychology at Columbia, a superstar. But she was a student, okay, and she wasn't making much progress, okay, for the first 6 or so months that she was in my lab. And I thought about it and thought, oh, if I do this, you know what I'm going to do? She'll probably get mad and leave the lab, and that'll be too bad because I like her and I think she has promise. But I decided to do it anyway. I asked Sarah to keep a daily record of everything she did for the next 2 weeks, and we would go over it. I'd never done this before. I've never done it since. She did it.
Yeah.
I talked to her a couple of days ago. I said, what was your feeling? She said, well, I thought it was weird, but I thought it was a challenge, but I didn't resent it at all. Okay. And she said, it changed my career. Well, what changed her career was when she showed me that, she had, in the last 2 weeks, watched 25 movies with her buddies up on Capitol Hill. And I noted that that was a lot of movies for 2 weeks. And maybe if she watched half of them, you know, she could get a little more work done in the lab. She ended up publishing 3 first authored Journal of Neuroscience papers and has had a great career. Okay. Yeah. So the common characteristics for me of good members, I mean, I'm just repeating what you said. Are they willing to spend huge amounts of time with me? Okay. Are they showing me that I'm important? Okay. That was because I wasn't very confident. I didn't have an academic background and so forth. But most of all, my concerns were their concerns. Yeah. Okay. If I walked into their office, I was the most important thing in their life for those few minutes. And as I said, they reeked of credibility and admitted fallibility. Yeah. So you also find that you don't have mentors that you don't have mentors for everything. You just have to figure out things for yourself. As I started doing more administrative work, there's nobody that told me how. When I was young, there was nobody that told me how to write a grant. I had to try it and see what happened. Okay. And the first one I wrote didn't happen very well. Okay. But the rest had worked pretty well. Okay. I had to figure out how to form groups. Okay. I didn't know how to form groups. Okay. And how to get people working together or how to encourage them to work together. A lot of that is putting something up on the blackboard and letting them tear it down and not feeling, you know, bad about that, feeling lucky that they have the energy to do that, in my opinion. So that's really the answers to that questions. Okay. Yeah. You also asked, how do they shape my work? Yeah. And Gottlieb was really the only one that shaped my work. Mm-hmm. Okay. He had a profound influence on my work. Mm-hmm. But the rest of them didn't shape my work at all. Mm-hmm. They shaped how I approach my work, and they shaped it, you know, every day of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ed. So I'll share a story back with you. It's kind of like a Julie Harris story. Same guy, James Dewey. Mm-hmm. He'd come in my office and he'd say, so Sumit, what do you think would happen if we did this? Whatever, you know, and I'd say, oh, let me think about it. And I'd give him an answer. And he'd say, wrong, and here are the data. And he'd pull out graphs to show me.
Yeah, doesn't need mentorship. Just needs, you know, for you to say, okay, keep going.
Yeah, so, and you gotta love it. When if the day when someone in your lab starts showing you up, you are there. You have achieved your goals, and now it's time to enjoy it.
Yeah. And so, you know, you get a number of, well, go on.
So I wanted to sort of follow up and ask, so today you've had such a successful run of postdoc students who themselves, like Sarah Woolley, who, you know, her sister's here, so Catherine. So we see her every now and then.
Right.
She herself, she exudes mentorship when she talks to students also. So at this stage, what do you look back at and find most fulfilling as a mentor, as you've seen the trajectories of your mentees for these many years?
Well, I think that's a really good question. Obviously, I love it. Okay. And for me, so one has to ask, okay, why do you go into science in the first place? Okay. And I think for me, as I've thought about this over the last, several years as I've aged, I realized that I always wanted to be immortal. Okay. And if you want to be immortal, okay, there's one foolproof way. Okay, pass on your genes, and the offspring will have some characteristics of personality and some characteristics of physical their physique and other characteristics of their cognitive abilities and stuff like that. But it's always with variable penetrance. Okay, you can't figure out what it's going to be. We learn that about genetics all the time. The other way you can be immortal if you really want to is be a scientist or a writer. Fortunately, back in history, somebody invented the printing press, and what you do might live forever, okay? Or it might stimulate things that live forever. So that's a path toward immortality. But another path toward immortality that again has variable penetrance is having a cadre of students, a cadre of people that you've interacted with closely that are going to go on, maybe in your field, maybe in another field, but share what you do. And to me, that's the most important thing. My lab was an active family place. In fact, we've gotten criticized, okay? One time a study section director said, anybody that's ever worked in Ruba Lab has to leave the room. Okay. And, it wasn't just if you've collaborated with this person, anybody that's ever worked with that jerk has to leave the room. Okay. People have heard of our lab dinner at ARO. Okay. It's a family. And it remains a family. We had parties together and so forth. Okay. And that to me is the most wonderful thing about it. It really is a separate family. I have a genetic family and I have a professional family, and many other people are part of that professional family because they've come to be incorporated into that group in some way or another, or have some loyalty to that group. And to me, that's really my legacy. I mean, that's really, for many of us, our legacy is the people that we've worked with and carry on some of the traditions and the interests and so forth. When I look at that, that's the thing I'm most proud of.
Well, thank you so much. I'll ask one more question, and this is sort of in the realm of evolution of a mentor. So you've spent time at 3 institutions. You started at Yale, then you were at Virginia, then you were at Washington, where you ran the Bloedel Center for many, many years. And over time, Ed, you've become a go-to person, not just for people at various stages of their career individually, but for groups of academics or departments or even institutions. We have leaned on you for like program reviews and things of that nature. So tell us a little bit about that evolution and what parts of these things you enjoy more or less, or how you change as a mentor as you're fulfilling these other roles.
Well, that's been a very scary part of my career, because I really had no training in it. I didn't work with anybody that was an administrator. I didn't, or a chairman. I did work with the one person that was a very, very famous scientist, member of the National Academy, Dick Thompson, but he really wasn't a mentor. Okay, it was. I liked him, and he was very good to me, but. I only lasted 6 months and then got the job at Yale. He was my postdoc advisor. I guess I've done it all by trial and error. Okay, I never had a mentor. I would pick up mentors along the way, people like you, okay, who would, and I guess I've done it mostly by listening to people and really trying to put their interests first. I think the secret of doing that, at least when I've been successful, it's when I've been able to listen, do my homework about the thing, find out what their goals are. because the goals of the people in a program are not necessarily the goals of the people that are the administrators of that program. And so you're trying to balance those. You don't want to say, oh, the administrators are crap. Okay. And you don't want to say to the people in the program, don't follow anything the administrators say. It's about the program. You have to think about, is that program worthwhile to the institution? And you often have to give the institution a rationale about why that program is important to them. Okay. Coming at Northwestern, there was no question because you have such a history of, greatness in hearing and speech research. But it was still a challenge in the sense that not everybody has that kind of respect for history. Okay. And so you have to tell them. I mean, at this day and age, it's easy. You have to tell them how many people are getting to be in their 60s and 70s. Okay. The baby boomers are a great thing for us. Okay. And we see all these companies developing and everything like that. So, but you have to listen and you have to try and figure out what are they going to listen to? I'm still scared when I do that. Okay. I don't have any experience and I never had any mentorship in that, and never really found a mentor to do that. Torsten Weasel was a bit of a mentor in that. Okay. We became friends fairly early in my career. The other thing, I'll share an experience, and it may seem egotistical, but I'll share an experience that changed my life. Victor Hamburger was the premier neuroembryologist in the world when I was studying neuroembryology, okay, and trying to become a developmentalist. I had never met Victor, but I knew of his former student, Ron Oppenheim. Victor was a very, very tall, very well-dressed Germanic person. He was born and raised in Germany and so forth. When I was first out of, I might have been at Yale or I might have been between postdoc and Yale, Gilbert Gottlieb invited me to a conference in Chicago of development of behavior and development of development of brain and development of behavior. And Victor was invited that Congress. And I knew Victor's student, Ron Oppenheim, because I'd been to North Carolina to Gilbert's lab. And I said to Ron, would you introduce me to Dr. Hamburger? Okay. And he said, sure. So at the first break, Ron introduced me to Dr. Hamburger. And Victor looked down at me because I was still short and he was still tall. And he looked at me and he said, Dr. Rubel, it's a pleasure to meet you. I just read your grant and I wished one of my students had written it. Victor took me from here to here in one sentence. I walked out to lunch with him and a crowd of people, and I thought to myself, if I ever get to be a senior scientist, if I could do that, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you. That was such a wonderful story and sort of encapsulates what mentorship is about. And maybe we'll pause there.
Okay.
And see if anyone has
Thank you for inviting me. And I don't take students anymore, but anybody that wants to ask me a question about mentorship or at any time, I really enjoy it.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions for me or Dr. Rubel, either way, we'll have Dr. Rubel answer them. So you ask, and I'll turn it over to you, Lisa.
Okay, this was just, better than I ever could have imagined. So I'm so glad that you succumbed to all of my arm twisting, Sumit, and agreed to do this. And it was just an absolute gift when Ed signed up for this session, just wanting to be in a mentoring session. That says a lot about who he's been and who he continues to be, just that he wanted to come along and be a part of this. And we thought, we can't waste this golden opportunity. So thanks for, being so generous with your time, as always. Every time I've met Ed, and I've had the fortune to attend a couple of those parties that are for his, his family, but he's very generous in opening it up to a lot of people. And it's a wonderful experience. And you feel like a little bit of that magic can rub off on anyone who's there. So, and I always love it when you climb up on a chair and have some things to say about all the changes in everybody's lives, new babies, new, weddings, labs that people have gone on to. And it's just a great mix of both personal pride and professional pride and everyone that you've worked with. And I know that that's the same for you as well, Sumit, knowing students that have worked with you. And that's the kind of family that I think we have always had in hearing science and that we want to continue to foster. So. We have a question that's a great one. How open are established researchers to periodically meeting with students to mutually discuss research and goals? Any of our experienced researchers want to give a stab at that?
I love it. Okay, obviously. It's, I'm not that busy in the lab anymore, although I still have a couple grants, but I'm like a dinosaur, but I love doing it.
I don't know if I'm experienced, but I like that, and I would be open to any student or anyone who would want to continue a conversation.
Yeah, I would add to that, and like O'Neill, I'm not that experienced, but especially nowadays when you can just ask someone, hey, can I sit in on a lab meeting? Because it's probably happening over Zoom. Those conversations can happen and maybe lead to one-on-ones as well.
That's a really great point, being able to sit in on lab, especially if there's someone whose research you're really interested in and maybe potentially, applying to be a postdoc or a PhD student in their lab. It seems like that would be a really great idea to be able to easily do that. Whereas we used to think we had to get on a plane and fly there and, visit the lab in person, but it can be totally different now, which is another thing I think we're learning. There's a lot of great comments coming in from Heather. I learned that mentors who make it look easy often have put a lot of thought and work into the business of running a lab smoothly, or lots and lots of trial and error. I mean, I think a lot of us, I put myself in this category as learning through the school of hard knocks, what works and what doesn't work, or maybe not learning. Thanks for offering the event. Could we maybe get an attendee list after the meeting? Yeah, if anyone does not want their name included on such a list, would you please let Darla know? You can just reply to her at the AMAUDSOC email address that you received your confirmation from, and we'll wait a couple of days to send that out. If you don't want to be on the list, let us know, but otherwise we'll assume that it's okay to send out a list. Can we connect to today's presenters if we have more questions later or want to discuss the topic more? I personally would love to hear from anybody. I don't, can we have a show of hands from our presenters? Anybody willing to be contacted afterwards? Yeah, raise your hand. Okay.
Lisa, I was going to say, one should never be shy about reaching out to anybody. I think one of the things when I was younger, and I used to look at these senior people in my field and I wanted to reason to go up to them. I kind of wish I had just done it. I just kind of wish I had just gone up to them and said, hello. If you connect, you connect. If you don't connect, you don't connect. But there's nothing lost. So my advice to everybody is really just do it, especially in this day and age when you're when it no longer requires travel to have meetings. Talking to people is very efficient. And I must admit, I would have been skeptical back in January if somebody says we could do something like this online. I would have said, this is never going to work out. It's worthless. Right. Person to person is really important. But it turns out that actually this is quite effective. I mean, there's just different advantages to in person as well, but this is quite effective. So my advice is, if you want to reach out to somebody, just reach out. All they can do is ignore you. Worst scenario.
Thanks so much, Anil. And Eric agrees with you. And Matt says that nobody's too important for you. And it impresses me when someone reaches out You have to get over the fear factor. These are awesome comments. Thank you so much for all of these. Chelsea asked if the mentoring sessions were recorded, are you able to share them with the group so we can listen to other topics? What a great question. We'll look into that. I'm not positive, but I'll check with Darla and see if that's possible. Yeah, we hate to lose all this awesome conversation, right?
Lisa, I wanted to add something just because it maybe follows up nicely with what you just mentioned. For those of you who are being reached out to, knowing that students might be really anxious about it and that they might be stressed out about a bunch of other things, having that at the forefront of your mind, sort of, I mean, at least for me, if I think about that, it ends up making me do the things that turn me into a better mentor myself.
I think that's really true because I think, I thought, oh, it's just me, I'm just an anxious person, but it turns out most people feel that way, anxious or awkward at first. And it's probably like giving presentations. At first it's horrible, but if you do it and you do it again and you do it again, you get better at it and desensitized to all the scariness. So yeah, I think it's good.
Add that if they don't respond to you the first time, it's not because they don't want to. They just they forget. So I actually tell everybody to email me more than once, so that if I've forgotten enough or it's been drowning in other emails or something. So don't let a lack of response stop you. At least try at least 1 or 2 more times, because it just may be, it could be a spam mail for all you know, but anyway.
It's so true. And sometimes, like, if you have to sit and give some thought about how you're going to respond, I find that unfortunately those are the emails I sometimes miss because you're caught up in answering all the things you have to do, right, for work. And then you wanted to be thoughtful about responding to this one. And then suddenly it's 200 emails down. So that can be tough too. Yeah,
Lisa,
so don't.
Can I say something about finding a mentor? Okay, the mistake I've made several times early in my career is helping my students or postdocs find a mentor for the next phase of their career. And what I can tell you is that you can always look up who that person has worked with, okay? And get a list either from them or you make it yourself of people that they've mentored, okay? And talk to a bunch of those people, particularly the people that have left their lab. Talk about what their experience was with that person. Have a conversation, because so many times people have left my lab either early back when I was at Yale or even most recently, and they've chosen a mentor because they love that work, okay? And they want to work in that area. But being in a lab is more than loving the work. It's loving the situation you're in. And so talk to people that have gone through it, okay, with that person. You don't need to, ask damning questions, but you'll get a feel for what it's like to work there.
Well, that sounds like a...
Sorry. And coming from you, that means a lot, because sometimes we talk about us growing an academic family. So it is getting to know who else came out of that lab as being maybe your academic cousin or sibling. Ed, for example, I consider my academic, uncle, and treated me as that. There's as much mentoring outside of the lab as inside the lab. So it's about chemistry. It's about people that you trust and building that extended academic family.
I like my grandkids too.
Kelly, that's absolutely just, a brilliant thought. And this is probably a great place for us to end the call today. Again, thanks to all of our absolutely fantastic hosts and to the co-hosts who helped them. Thanks enormously to Darla for helping us organize all this, to Sumit and Ed for an incredibly inspirational discussion. And we'll do more of this. Thanks again for being here. Thanks. Bye, everybody.